The sound of metal clanging against bone echoed through the small bedroom. Amanda's body jerked with every blow, her hands barely lifting in defense. The Chemo Wig stand, once a symbol of her survival, was now slick with her blood. The man swinging it wasn't a stranger. It was Greg, her high school sweetheart, the man she had trusted with her life. "Greg, please," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper, eyes wide with disbelief. But his face was twisted in rage, his breath coming hard and fast, like a man possessed. Each strike was harder than the last. From outside, the neighbors heard the thuds and muffled cries, but by the time someone pounded on the door, the room had fallen silent, except for Greg's uneven breathing. He stared at Amanda's still body, his grip tightening on the blood-stained stand as if he didn't recognize himself anymore. The pounding on the door grew louder. Someone shouted his name. Greg took a step back, staring at what he had done, then bolted toward the back door. Amanda Wilson had always been known for her smile. Even during chemo, when her hair had fallen out and her skin had grown pale, she wore that smile like armor. She was the kind of woman who made everyone else feel brave. At 40, she had survived breast cancer, a fight that had taken nearly 2 years of surgeries, hospital stays, and the kind of exhaustion most people couldn't imagine. The Chemo Wig stand by her bed was a quiet reminder of that fight. On it rested the soft blonde wig she'd worn through her treatment, now replaced by her natural curls. She lived in a modest 2-story home in Cedar Springs, a small town in Indiana where everybody knew everybody. After her recovery, she had reconnected with Greg Thompson, her high school boyfriend. He'd been the quarterback back then, and she, the cheerleader with big dreams. They'd gone their separate ways after graduation, each marrying someone else. But life had a way of circling back. When they reunited at a high school reunion, Greg was charming and attentive. He told her she was still the most beautiful girl in the room. He said he regretted letting her go. Amanda, fresh from her battle with cancer, saw him as a chance to start over, someone who had once loved her before life had gotten messy. They married within a year. To friends, they looked like the perfect second-chance romance. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Greg had trouble keeping a job, drank more than he should, and had a short fuse. Amanda told her best friend Melissa that sometimes he scared her, not with what he said, but with how quickly his face could change when he was angry. Still, she stayed. She had fought too hard for her life to give up on her marriage so soon. On the night of the attack, Cedar Springs was quiet, the streets lit only by the dim glow of street lamps. Amanda had just gotten home from a late shift at the diner, where she worked part-time. Greg was already drinking in the living room, the smell of whiskey heavy in the air. "You're late," he said, his voice low but sharp. "I stay to help close. Jenna's kid is sick, so I don't care about Jenna's kid," he shouted, slamming his glass onto the coffee table. Amanda froze. She knew this look, the one that made her feel like she was staring at a stranger. The argument escalated quickly. Greg accused her of cheating. She denied it, but the more she defended herself, the angrier he became. By the time they reached the bedroom, his rage had boiled over. His eyes landed on the wig stand by the bed, a harmless object until it became the weapon in his hands. He swung. Once. Twice. Again. Amanda stumbled, hitting the wall. Her cry was short, sharp, and filled with disbelief. Outside, a neighbor named Carl, who lived across the street, heard the commotion. He stepped out onto his porch, frowning. The sound was unmistakable, violence. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice came through the line, calm but urgent. 911, what's your emergency? I think something bad's happening at Amanda Wilson's house, Carl said, his voice trembling. It sounds bad. Real bad. Back inside, Amanda tried to crawl toward the door, her hands slipping on the hardwood floor slick with blood. But Greg's shadow loomed over her, and the wig stand came down again. At that moment, the sound of sirens cut through the night air. Greg froze, his chest heaving. He had seconds to decide, run, or face what he had done. And that's when he heard the pounding at the door. The front door flew open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. The smell of alcohol hit them first, sharp and sour in the still air. Then they saw it. Amanda lying motionless on the floor, her head turned toward them, eyes half open. The wig stand, bent and smeared with blood, was only inches from her hand. "Dispatch! We got a possible 187. Officer Rachel Hayes said into her radio, her voice tight. Send EMS immediately." Greg was standing against the far wall, his hands trembling. I didn't mean," he stammered, his words slurring from drink. Rachel's partner, Officer Dan Peters, moved in fast, pinning Greg's arms behind his back. "Don't move," Dan growled, snapping the cuffs into place. Greg didn't fight. His eyes were fixed on Amanda, as if he couldn't quite believe she wasn't going to get up. Paramedics rushed in seconds later. The lead medic, a tall man named Brandon, knelt beside Amanda and began checking for a pulse. His gloves quickly turned red. "She's barely hanging on," he said, his tone grim. They worked frantically, calling out vitals, pushing oxygen, and lifting her onto a stretcher. One of Amanda's slippers fell off in the process, landing in a small pool of her blood. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, watching them go, before turning back to Greg. "What happened here?" Greg's face twisted. "We argued. She pushed me, and I just snapped." Rachel's stomach tightened. She'd heard this line before, too many times. Snapping was what men like Greg called it when they decided to cross a line they couldn't uncross. Outside, neighbors had gathered, murmuring in shock. Melissa, Amanda's best friend, had run over in her pajamas, her hair still in curlers. "Where's Amanda?" she demanded. Rachel hesitated, not wanting to deliver the news on the front lawn. "They're taking her to Cedar Springs General. You should go there." Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God!" She turned and bolted for her car. Back inside, Rachel began scanning the scene. She noted the overturned nightstand, the broken lamp, the blood splatter against the wall. She crouched beside the wig stand, careful not to touch it. "This is our weapon," she said quietly to Dan. Dan nodded. "I'll get the evidence bag." They also found Greg's half-empty whiskey bottle on the dresser, and a phone lying cracked on the floor. "Check her call history," Rachel said. "See if she tried to call for help." Dan picked it up carefully with gloved hands. "Screen's busted, but we can get it to the tech guys." As they worked, the radio crackled again. "Be advised! Victim coded in the ambulance. They're performing CPR en route." Rachel's chest tightened. She knew what that usually meant. She finished photographing the scene, but her mind was already moving ahead. This wasn't just another domestic disturbance. This was going to be a homicide investigation, and Greg, still swaying slightly in the corner, wasn't going anywhere tonight. Dan led him out to the squad car, his cuffs clinking in the quiet street. Greg didn't look up at the neighbors staring from behind curtains and half-open doors. Rachel took one last look around the bedroom before stepping out. The wig stand was gone now, sealed in an evidence bag, but the mark it had left on the room and on Amanda's life was permanent. At the hospital, doctors fought to keep Amanda alive. Back at the station, Rachel sat down at her desk, opened her notebook, and wrote at the top of the page, "Amanda Wilson, victim. Greg Thompson, suspect." She tapped her pen against the paper. She'd been a cop for 12 years, and she knew one thing for sure. There was always more to the story than what the killer first told you. Rachel gripped the phone tighter as the ER doctor spoke. "I'm sorry, Officer Hayes. Amanda didn't make it. We called time of death at 10:46 p.m. For a moment, Rachel didn't respond. Even though she had seen death countless times, it still hit her like a cold wave, especially when it came to domestic cases. She glanced at Greg, who was sitting cuffed in the holding room, staring at the floor. "Thank you, doctor," she said finally, her voice low. "I'll notify the family." She hung up and immediately called Melissa. The woman's voice cracked when Rachel told her the news. "She survived cancer," Melissa whispered. "She survived cancer, and he took her from us." When Rachel walked into the holding room, Greg's eyes darted to her. "Is she okay?" Rachel stared at him, her jaw tight. "She's dead, Greg." His face twitched, something between shock and guilt, but there were no tears. "It was an accident," he mumbled. Rachel didn't answer. She slid the door shut and left him with his thoughts. The next morning, the small-town police station buzzed with reporters calling for statements. Cedar Springs didn't see many homicides, and when the victim was a beloved cancer survivor, the case became front-page news overnight. Rachel sat in the conference room with Detective Luis Ramirez, her partner for the case. They had boxes of files, photos from the scene, and Amanda's phone records. "First impressions?" Luis asked, flipping through the preliminary report. Rachel rubbed her forehead. "It's not a whodunit. We got the guy, the weapon, and a witness who heard the attack. The question is, why? And is there more to this than a drunken argument?" Luis leaned back in his chair. "Domestic violence cases almost always have history. My guess? This wasn't the first time he hurt her." They went over Amanda's phone. While the cracked screen made it useless to scroll, the tech department had pulled the call logs. The last outgoing call was to 911, only 5 seconds long before it cut off. "She tried to get help," Rachel said quietly. "Greg probably smashed it," Luis added. "Let's check her text messages." They found several exchanges between Amanda and Melissa in the days before her death. One stood out. "Amanda, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell the truth about Greg." "Melissa, what's going on?" "Amanda, he's been getting worse. Drinking more. Yelling. Threatened to kill me last night." Rachel exhaled slowly. This was no sudden snap. It was escalation. They interviewed Melissa that afternoon. She arrived at the station wearing sunglasses, even indoors, her face pale from crying. "She told me she was scared," Melissa said. "But Amanda, she always made excuses for him. Said he was stressed about money or he didn't mean it. I told her to leave, but she wouldn't. She said she couldn't handle another big life change after the cancer. She wanted stability." Luis scribbled notes. "Did you ever see Greg get physical with her before?" Melissa hesitated. "Once, at a barbecue last summer. He grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. She laughed it off, but I saw the look in her eyes. She was embarrassed, afraid." Rachel felt her gut tightening. By day's end, they had more evidence. A neighbor's doorbell camera had captured Greg leaving the house moments before police arrived. In the grainy footage, he was holding something in his hand before tossing it into the bushes. Luis looked up from the screen. "Bet you a week's paycheck that's the wig stand before he tried to stash it." They sent a unit to search the bushes. The object was gone. "That means someone else could have picked it up," Rachel said. "Or Greg came back for it later." Luis nodded. "Either way, we need that footage cleaned up." That night, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Greg's story didn't add up. He claimed Amanda pushed him first, but the physical evidence didn't match. She had defensive wounds on her hands, bruises on her forearms, marks of someone trying to protect themselves from an attack, not start one. Still, the DA wanted an airtight case before trial. They needed more than just circumstantial evidence to shut down any self-defense argument. 2 days later, Rachel got a call from a lab. "We ran the blood spatter analysis," the technician said. "It shows at least 5 separate blows to the head. This wasn't one hit in the heat of the moment. This was repeated, intentional force." Rachel hung up, her heart pounding. That was exactly what they needed to prove intent. But just as she was about to tell Luis the good news, her phone buzzed again, this time with an unfamiliar number. When she answered, a low male voice said, "You're digging too deep, detective. Leave Greg alone if you know what's good for you." Rachel stared at her phone, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. The voice hadn't been familiar, but the warning was clear. Someone didn't want this case moving forward. Luis noticed her pale face as she walked into the squad room. "What's wrong?" "Got a call," Rachel said, lowering her voice. "Anonymous. Told me to leave Greg alone." Luis leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "That's not your average drunk domestic case." "Nope," Rachel said. "Which means Greg's life before Amanda might not be as clean as we thought." They dug into Greg's background, pulling up old police reports. It didn't take long for the red flags to pop. 2 restraining orders, both from ex-girlfriends in different states. Assault charges that were dropped when the victims refused to testify. A bar fight in Illinois that left another man in the hospital. Rachel rubbed her temple. This guy's got a history of violence, but he's slippery. Always just enough charm to talk his way out, or a victim too scared to go through with it. Luis tapped the file. If he's got friends willing to make threatening calls to cops, he's still got people in his corner. They went back to the night of the murder, interviewing more neighbors. Most only heard yelling and loud thuds. But an older man named Earl, who lived behind Amanda's house, said something interesting. I saw a black pickup truck idling in the alley right after the ambulance left, Earl said. Didn't think much of it first, but then a man got out, walked to Amanda's yard, and disappeared into the bushes. Came back with something long in his hand. Rachel's stomach tightened. Did you get a look at him? Too dark to see his face, Earl admitted, but he was wearing a camo jacket. Tall, broad shoulders. Luis exchanged a glance with Rachel. Sounds like someone came back for the wig stand. The search for the missing weapon became priority 1. Without it, their case was strong but not bulletproof. Meanwhile, Greg's court-appointed attorney filed a motion for bail, arguing that he was a lifelong member of the community and not a flight risk. The DA was furious. Rachel and Luis worked overtime to get the judge to see Greg's pattern of violence. Melissa came to the station again to give a follow-up statement. She was angry now, her grief sharp like glass. If they let him out, Rachel, he's going to hurt someone else. You know that. Rachel nodded. I know, and we're not going to let that happen. Later that night, Rachel drove home, still thinking about Earl's story. She decided to take a detour past Amanda's house. The crime scene tape still fluttered in the breeze. She parked down the street, watching the darkened windows. And that's when she saw it. Headlights creeping down the alley. A black pickup truck. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her phone to call Luis. But before she could dial, the truck stopped near the yard. The driver's door opened. A tall man in a camo jacket stepped out. Rachel slid lower in her seat, her hand on her gun. He moved quickly, like he knew exactly where he was going. Then she saw it. He was carrying a long, narrow bag. She opened her door silently, stepping into the shadows. "Police!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the still night. "Drop it and put your hands where I can see them." The man froze for a split second, then bolted. Rachel gave chase, her feet pounding the pavement. "Stop!" she yelled again, but he disappeared around a corner of a neighboring yard. When she reached the spot, he was gone. All that was left was the bag he dropped in his rush. She unzipped it. Inside was the bent, blood-stained Chemo Wig stand. She called it immediately, and within minutes, backup arrived to secure it. Luis whistled when he saw it. "That's it. We've got him now." Rachel wasn't so sure. "We've got the weapon." "Yeah, but that wasn't Greg running away tonight, which means someone else is helping him, and they just made this case a whole lot more complicated." Rachel's grip tightened around her phone as the voice faded. There was no breathing on the other end this time, no hesitation, just that flat, cold warning. Then the line went dead. Luis saw the look on her face. "Same guy." "Same number," Rachel said, pocketing the phone. "But I think he knows we got the wig stand now." Luis frowned, which means he knows where we've been tonight. He's watching us. Back at the station, the crime lab took immediate custody of the weapon. The blood on the metal pole matched Amanda's DNA. But that was expected. What wasn't expected were the faint fingerprints on the handle. 2 sets. One belonged to Greg. The other didn't match anyone in their database. "Could be our mystery man," Luis said, leaning over the lab tech's shoulder. Rachel nodded slowly. "Whoever he is, he's not random. People don't just show up to clean up crime scenes unless they got skin in the game." The next morning, Rachel pulled Greg into the interrogation room. He looked worse than before, eyes bloodshot, hair unkempt, wearing the same wrinkled T-shirt from the night of the murder. "You want to explain why someone tried to hide your murder weapon?" Rachel asked, sliding a photo of the wig stand across the table. Greg's eyes flickered. I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel studied him. You've got 2 sets of prints on it. Yours and somebody else's. Who's your friend in the camo jacket? Greg's jaw tightened. You think I've got friends? Lady, I don't even have a lawyer I pick myself. Rachel leaned forward. This guy's not just some buddy. He was willing to risk getting caught to protect you, which means you owe him. And if you owe him, we'll find out why. Greg looked away, his silence speaking volumes. Luis and Rachel shifted focus to Greg's phone records. That's when they spotted several late-night calls to an unlisted number in the days leading up to Amanda's death. Burner phone, Luis said, registered to no one. But guess what? Cell tower pings put near Greg's house the night she died. Rachel tapped the desk. Could be the same phone that called me. They tracked the burner to a second-hand electronics store 2 towns over. The owner, a wiry man with tattooed forearms, recognized the number. Yeah, sold that one about 3 weeks ago. Guy paid cash. Didn't give a name. Rachel showed him the grainy still from Earl's Alley sighting. The tall man in the camo jacket. That's him, the owner said without hesitation. Bought a prepaid card, too. Didn't say much, but he had this big scar across his neck. Hard to miss. They finally had a lead. Rachel ran a search through old case files and mugshots until she found him. Victor Vic Harlan, a former construction worker with a record for assault and intimidation. He'd done time in Illinois for breaking a man's jaw in a bar fight. But what caught Rachel was his connection to Greg. Vic had been arrested in the same Illinois bar fight that Greg was involved in years ago. Louis shook his head. So they go way back. That explains the loyalty. And the threats, Rachel added. Vic's protecting him because Greg must have done the same for him once. This isn't just about Amanda. This is about debts between violent men. They put out an APB for Vic, but finding him was easier said than done. He had no permanent address, no steady job, and a habit of disappearing for weeks at a time. Rachel, frustrated, went home late that night. She barely had time to take off her jacket when her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Still digging? You've got until tomorrow to drop it. No signature. No emoji. Just a photo attached. Rachel's blood ran cold as she opened it. It was her own car, parked in her driveway, taken just minutes earlier. She called Luis immediately. He's here. Vic's here in town. And now it's personal. Luis's voice hardened. Then we stop waiting for him to make the next move. We go on offense. The woman who walked into the station that morning looked nervous, clutching a manila envelope to her chest. She introduced herself as Jenna Collins, a cashier at a local gas station. I think I saw something, she said, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone followed her. Greg Thompson and another guy, tall, camo jacket, big scar on his neck. They were here the day before she died. Rachel's pulse quickened. What were they doing? They were parked at the pump for a long time, Jenna said. Greg was in the driver's seat. The other guy was pacing, talking real fast. It looked heated. I couldn't hear much, but I caught Greg saying, "It's got to look like I lost control." Luis's eyes widened. "You're sure about that?" Jenna nodded. I was going to forget about it, but then I saw the news. I checked our store security footage, and she slid the envelope across the desk. Rachel pulled out still frames from the gas station camera. Greg in the driver's seat. Vic beside him, gesturing wildly. The timestamp was 24 hours before Amanda's death. This was a break they needed, but it also raised new questions. Rachel and Luis reviewed the footage again in the conference room. "This changes everything," Luis said. "If Greg said it had to look like he lost control, then this wasn't some heat-of-the-moment domestic fight. It was premeditated." Rachel frowned, and Vic was in on it. They speculated on the motive. Amanda had no life insurance policy that Greg could cash in on. But when they pulled her financial records, they found something else. A $60,000 payout from a wrongful termination lawsuit she'd won against her former employer, deposited just 2 weeks before she was killed. "And guess whose name is on the joint account?" Luis said, holding up the printout. They went to confront Greg with this information. He sat in the interrogation room with his court-appointed lawyer. looking bored until Rachel dropped the still frame from the gas station in front of him. His smirk faded. "You want to tell me why you were with Vic the day before Amanda was murdered?" Rachel asked. "I don't have to answer that," Greg muttered, glancing at his lawyer. Rachel leaned forward. "We know about the payout. We know you had access to it. And we know you told Vic it had to look like you lost control. That's conspiracy to commit murder, Greg. You're not walking away from this." For the first time, Greg's bravado cracked. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "Vic!" He doesn't let people walk away from him. Rachel held his gaze. "You should have thought about that before you let him into your marriage." That night, Rachel couldn't shake Greg's words. She knew Vic was dangerous, but if Greg was afraid of him, it meant Vic wasn't just helping cover up the crime. He might have been the driving force behind it, and that meant Vic was still out there, possibly planning to silence more witnesses. She doubled her patrol past her own house, made sure her locks were reinforced, and kept her service weapon within reach. Still, she couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made her tense. The next morning, Louise called with bad news. "Rachel, Vic struck again. Jenna's missing." Rachel's chest tightened. "When?" "Last night. Her neighbor saw her get into a truck that looked like Vic's. She hasn't been home since." Rachel swore under her breath. The witness who'd just given them their biggest break had vanished, and they both knew what that likely meant. They mobilized a search team immediately, focusing on Vic's known haunts, abandoned warehouses, back roads, bars where he had old drinking buddies. But every lead went cold. By the end of the day, Rachel felt like she was running in circles. Vic was always one step ahead, always just out of reach. And with each passing hour, Jenna's chances of survival shrank. That night, Rachel sat alone in the dim squad room. The whiteboard in front of her was covered in photos. Amanda smiling with her wig stand, Greg smirking in his mugshot, Vic in a blurry security still, Jenna in her gas station uniform. She stared at them until her eyes burned. She'd been a cop for 12 years, but right now, she felt like she was losing. She whispered to herself, "I can't save Jenna. I couldn't save Amanda. What am I even doing?" Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She's still alive, for now. It was followed by a map pin. Rachel's tires screeched as she turned onto the dirt road the map pin had led her to. The headlights illuminated nothing but trees and shadows. Her heart pounded, not from fear for herself, but from the knowledge that if she was too late, Jenna would join Amanda in the morgue. She slowed as the road narrowed into a clearing. There, half hidden by a leaning shed, sat a black pickup truck. The driver's door was ajar, and a dim yellow light spilled from inside the shed. Rachel radioed in her location. Possible suspect sighting. Backup en route. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Copy that. Hayes. Units are 10 minutes out." 10 minutes was too long. She approached quietly, weapon drawn, her boots crunching on gravel. The shed door was partially open. She could hear voices, low, sharp. "You shouldn't have gone to the cops, Jenna," a man's voice said. It was deep, menacing. "Vic, I just wanted to tell the truth." Jenna's voice trembled. "You think the truth matters?" Vic growled. "Greg's my friend. He needed help. You are a problem." Rachel took a steadying breath and shoved the door wide open. "Police." Step away from her. Vic spun toward her, his scar catching the light. Jenna was tied to a chair, her eyes wide. Vic's lip curled. "You just don't quit, do you?" Rachel kept her aim steady. "Untie her. Now." He didn't move. Instead, his gaze darted toward the workbench. "Don't," Rachel warned, but he lunged for it. She fired once, the bullet striking the wall just inches from his arm. He froze, glaring at her. "Hands on your head," she ordered. Slowly, Vic obeyed, his face twisted with fury. She cuffed him while keeping her weapon ready, then rushed to cut Jenna free. "You okay?" Rachel asked. Jenna nodded shakily. "I thought I was dead." Backup arrived minutes later, and Vic was hauled to the squad car, shouting threats the whole way. Back at the station, Rachel and Luis interrogated him. He played the tough guy for the first 20 minutes, but when they showed him the gas station footage and the recovered wig stand, his demeanor shifted. Greg came to me, Vic finally said. Told me he wanted out of the marriage. Said Amanda wouldn't leave him, and he needed her gone. He offered me $5,000 to help make it look like he lost his temper. Said the money would come from her settlement after she was dead. Luis leaned forward. And you agreed. Vic smirked. I didn't hit her. That was all Greg. I just made sure things didn't point back at him. Rachel's voice was like steel. That makes you an accessory to murder. Vic, you're going down with him. The DA now had everything: motive, weapon, eyewitness testimony, and a confession tying Greg and Vic together. But Rachel knew they needed one last push to make the case airtight. She went back to Greg, this time with Vic's confession in hand. He gave you up, she said, sliding the statement across the table. He says you planned it, paid him to clean it up. That's conspiracy and first-degree murder. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Greg's eyes flickered, and for the first time, he looked truly trapped. Vic wanted it more than I did, he muttered. He said she was making me weak. He's the one who said to use the wig stand. Something personal. Something that would send a message. Rachel felt her stomach churn. Send a message to who? Greg gave a dark smile. To anyone who thought beating cancer made her untouchable. Rachel walked out of the room, her jaw tight. She'd seen plenty of cruelty in her career. But this, using a symbol of someone's survival as the very thing to kill them, was a new level of depravity. Still, she finally had everything she needed to make sure neither Greg nor Vic would ever see the outside of a prison again. Rachel stood in the jail infirmary, watching Greg lying on a cot, one eye swollen shut, a split lip glistening with dry blood. He was conscious, but the swagger was gone. You're lucky you're still breathing, Rachel said, her voice flat. Greg gave a bitter laugh that ended in a wince. Vic's people don't like loose ends. That's why you're going to testify, Rachel said. You tell the jury exactly how this went down, every detail, every conversation, or the next time you might not be so lucky. Greg looked at her, weighing his options. He knew Rachel was right. If Vic's people could get to him in jail, testifying might be his only way to survive long enough to see another day. Finally, he nodded. The trial began 3 months later in a packed Indiana courtroom. The local press had dubbed it the Chemo Wig stand murder. Every seat was taken. Friends of Amanda, domestic violence advocates, curious townsfolk, and reporters scribbling in their notebooks. The prosecution painted a chilling picture. Greg, resentful of Amanda's independence and her $60,000 settlement, plotting with Vic to end her life. The wig stand, her symbol of survival, was turned into a weapon to humiliate and destroy her. Melissa took the stand, her voice breaking as she read Amanda's final text. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell the truth about Greg. The jury hung on every word. Then came Jenna, describing how Vic abducted her to keep her from testifying. She kept her composure, but her hands shook when she identified Vic in courtroom. The defense tried to paint Greg as a man who lost control in a heated argument, but the gas station footage, the recovered weapon, and Vic's own statement destroyed that narrative. When Greg took the stand, he admitted to hitting Amanda multiple times, but insisted Vic push him into it. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Mr. Thompson, was it Vic who held the wig stand, or was it you? Greg's shoulders slumped. It was me. The verdict came after only 4 hours of deliberation. Greg Thompson, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Victor Harlan, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after fact, and kidnapping. Greg was sentenced to life without parole. Vic received 40 years. At the sentencing, Melissa read a statement on behalf of Amanda's family. Amanda fought for her life once, against cancer. She should have been allowed to live the life she fought so hard for. Instead, the person she trusted most took it from her. But today, we take something from him, his freedom. Rachel stood in the back, feeling the weight of the case lift from her shoulders. She knew nothing could bring Amanda back, but at least there was justice. Weeks later, she drove past Amanda's house. The crime scene tape was gone, the windows open to the breeze. A for sale sign stood in the yard. Rachel parked for a moment, her eyes drifting to the bedroom window, where she had first seen the blood-stained floor. In her mind, she replaced that image with Amanda smiling, standing tall, her wig stand holding nothing but a reminder of victory, not violence. As she pulled away, she thought about the anonymous threats, the sleepless nights, and the witnesses who had risked everything to speak up. This case had started with tragedy, but it ended with truth, because no one had backed down. And for Rachel, that was the only kind of ending worth fighting for.